In the 9th century, Viking raiders assailed the collapsing Carolingian Empire. But as the Vikings entrenched themselves in France, they began to look farther south, to the Iberian Peninsula, modern Spain and Portugal. Most of Spain was ruled by the Emirate of Córdoba, the wealthiest and militarily strongest state in Western Europe during this period. The emir's well-organized armies posed a real danger to any Viking raiders, but the wealthy cities of Muslim Spain, known in Arabic as al-Andalus, were too tempting to resist. Two Viking leaders, Hastein and Björn Ironsides, formed an alliance and struck out for the Iberian Peninsula. Their target, the rich towns of the Emirate of Córdoba. I'm creating a live-action historical drama TV series about the Crusades, Knights of the Cross, sponsored by the new streaming service ChristianChannel.com. Help us make this show happen. Click on the link below to contribute to the crowdfunding campaign for Knights of the Cross, which will capture all the heroism and adventure of the Third Crusade, led by Richard the Lionheart. Once Vikings entrenched themselves on the River Loire in France, it was only a matter of time before they pressed farther south to explore the wealthy Muslim holdings in the Iberian Peninsula, that is modern-day Spain and Portugal. The riches of Cordoba were a tempting prospect. In the 9th century, the Umayyad Emirate of Córdoba was the westernmost stronghold of Muslim civilization. The bulk of the Iberian Peninsula was under Muslim rule. Only in the rugged Cantabrian mountains of the northwest did Christian rule endure. Cordoba, with a population of some 200,000, was by far the largest and richest city in Western Europe. But Muslim Spain would be no easy pickings. The emirate boasted a strong and well-organized military of infantry and light cavalry. During this period, the emir's armory manufactured 20,000 arrows every month. Both infantry and cavalry wore mail or scale armor, as well as iron helmets, which only wealthier Vikings could afford. The Emirate's leading warriors were the Mamluks, slave soldiers raised from boyhood to be the emir's elite fighting force. Cordoba's standing army could react more quickly to a Viking attack than the levies of France or England. Indeed, the Iberian Peninsula as a whole was primed for war. In the face of the Muslim military powerhouse to its south, the Christian kingdom of Asturias had to maintain a high level of combat readiness. The poor but determined Christian states of the Iberian Mountains also posed a considerable challenge to Viking raiders. In the east, Muslim geographers described the Vikings they met in Russia as al-Rus. In Spain, they called them al-Majus. The term was not created for the Vikings, but for the Zoroastrians of Persia, for whom fire was a primary symbol. Arab writers misinterpreted the cremation in Viking funerary rites as fire worship. Their religion is that of the Magi, wrote the chronicler al-Watwat, and they burned their dead with fire. The geographer Ibn Said offered his own interpretation of fire worship among northern peoples. Nothing to them seems more important than fire, for the cold in their lands is severe. History records 844 as the year of the first Viking raid on the Iberian Peninsula. From the Loire, a Viking band sailed south to the Gironde. Charles the Bald, the king of West Francia, was distracted by a dispute with Pippin of Aquitaine, and so the Vikings managed to sail up the river Garonne as far as Toulouse. They moved on to plunder the coast of Galicia and Asturias. When they attacked La Coruña, they encountered a strong Christian force led by King Ramiro I. Ramiro's troops fought cohesively and effectively. Galician ballistas, giant crossbows, inflicted serious casualties on the Vikings. The Christians captured 70 of the Norsemen's longships, and Ramiro ordered them burned on the beach. The surviving Norsemen sailed farther south down the coast of modern Portugal, which at the time was controlled by Umayyad Córdoba. The Vikings landed near Lisbon in August. Arab chroniclers state that their fleet numbered around 100 vessels, which means that it must have been almost twice that large when it set out from the Loire. For 13 days, the Vikings plundered lands around Lisbon. the Umayyad governor of Lisbon dispatched messengers to Cordoba to raise the alarm. The Emir, Abd al-Rahman II, put the governors of the coastal districts on alert. Meanwhile, the Vikings sacked Cadiz and the fortress of Medina Sidonia. They next traveled on the Guadalquivir River into the Emir's wealthiest districts. Cordoba itself lay in their path. On September 29, the Vikings established a base on Isla Menor, an island in the Guadalquivir. From here, they began to systematically ravage the region. On October 1st, the fleet continued upriver another 15 miles until they reached Seville. To these Vikings, Seville must have been a tantalizing sight. Aside from Cordoba, Seville was the greatest and wealthiest city in Iberia. It was well beyond anything the Norsemen would have found in England or France, where the towns were poor and small since the decline of the Roman Empire and the establishment of Arab control of the Mediterranean Sea. Seville, by contrast, benefited from the vast trade networks secured by the great Muslim conquests. As they approached this magnificent city, the Vikings must have been giddy imagining the loot within its walls. When the townspeople saw the Vikings disembarking on the riverbank, they sallied out to challenge them. This was brave, but ultimately foolish. The Vikings were experienced warriors, and when they attacked, the townsmen panicked and scattered. In the turmoil, the Vikings rushed into the city, where they indulged in a week's worth of unhindered plundering. Many of the townspeople were killed or taken captive, though a large number of them fled into the mountains. Once they finished looting Seville, the Vikings returned loaded with booty and prisoners to their camp at Isla Menor. From here, they continued to dispatch raiding parties throughout the region. Days later, they journeyed back to Seville, hoping to capture returning townspeople. But the city was still mostly deserted. A small group took refuge in a mosque, where the Vikings slaughtered them. The sheer boldness of the attack on Seville took Umayyad Córdoba off guard. But the Emir finally did organize a military response. With the help of catapults, the Cordoban army drove the Vikings out of Seville. Umayyad detachments began ambushing Viking raiding parties. The Emir's men captured a large number of Norse ships, killing all the raiders on board. As the weeks wore on, the Umayyads continued to pressure the Vikings, making their position increasingly untenable. In early November, the Muslims ambushed the bulk of the Vikings near Seville, killing many of them, including their leader. To celebrate, the Emir dispatched the severed heads of the Viking commander and some 200 of his men to the Berber Emir in Tangier. The surviving Vikings were now trapped on their island base. They negotiated with the Umayyads, exchanging their prisoners for passage out of Spain. The remnant of the Norse fleet passed Lisbon as it headed back for the Loire. Historian John Haywood estimates that less than a quarter of the original expedition returned home. From their showdown with the Asturians to their audacious sacking of Seville, the first Viking attack on Iberia proved to be a deadly caper marked by the reckless adventurism that characterizes the Viking Age. In the aftermath of this jarring episode, the Emir took steps to bolster his defenses. Lookout posts were established on the Atlantic coast, and a new armory was installed at Seville. The Emir also organized a fleet to patrol his coastline. The Muslim warships were large, swift-sailing galleys. They bore crews of 50 to 100 sailors and warriors. The Emir placed catapults on his vessels to counter any future Viking raiding parties. But the most famous Viking attack on Iberia was launched by two of history's most renowned Viking commanders, Björn Ironside and Hastein. Later legend cast Bjorn as the son of Ragnar Lodbrok, a semi-mythical figure of the Nordic sagas. As a child, Bjorn's mother was said to have imbued him with magic invulnerability to wounds, earning him the title Ironsides. Hastein was one of the 9th century's most well-traveled Viking leaders, ending his career as the final great opponent of Alfred the Great in England. In 859, Hastein and Bjorn set out from a base on the Loire with a fleet of some 62 ships bound for the Iberian coastline. First, they tried to attack Galicia and Asturias, but the Christians confronted them with a resistance that proved too strong, so they moved on to plunder the Emir's western coastline, where initially they found easier pickings. But the Emir's fleet responded quickly. capturing 2 Viking ships already loaded with plunder and prisoners. With Muslim ships in pursuit, Bjorn and Hastein made a drive up the Guadalquivir, perhaps intent on attacking Seville. When the Emir's ships attacked with incendiary weapons, the Vikings lost several ships to fire and narrowly escaped. The usual Viking tactic was to avoid strong resistance and look for an easier target, and Bjorn and Hastein did just that. They moved on to Algeciras, near Gibraltar, where they launched a surprise attack. The inhabitants were completely overwhelmed. The Vikings sacked the town and burned the chief mosque. Hoping to find more plunder, Bjorn and Hastein now crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and entered the Mediterranean. They struck the African coast, attacking Nakor. They made short work of local troops and then plundered freely for a week. They captured the harem of a local emir, which was later ransomed by the Emir of Córdoba himself. From Africa, the Vikings veered back to Muslim Spain, plundering the coast of Murcia and the Balearic Islands. From here, they moved back to plunder parts of France before setting up a winter camp on an island in Camargue, a large delta of the River Rhône. In the spring, Hastein and Bjorn sailed some 100 miles up the Rhône, plundering Nîmes, Arles, and Valence as they went. But the Franks defeated them in battle, and so they decided to head back out into the open sea. According to legend, during this time, Hastein and Bjorn sacked Rome, but this is a myth and did not in fact occur historically. Instead, they moved along the Tuscan coast, plundering as they went. In 861, they crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, intent on returning home. They didn't know that the Emir of Córdoba had prepared an ambush for them. In the narrow passage of the straits, the Emir's fleet waited for them, attacking the Vikings as they made the crossing. A desperate battle ensued, in which the Muslims emerged victorious. The Viking fleet was devastated. Of Hastein and Bjorn's original 60 ships, only 20 escaped. Ever undaunted, Bjorn and Hastein continued raiding with their remnant fleet. Just before they exited Spanish waters, they attacked the tiny Christian kingdom of Navarre, sacking the town of Pamplona. Amazingly, they managed to capture King Garcia I. For his ransom, the Vikings collected an incredible 70,000 gold dinars. Thus, despite the final disaster of their expedition, the survivors of Bjorn and Hastein's band returned to the Loire in 862, very rich indeed. It's one of those twists of fate that seem to characterize Viking history. The daring nature of Bjorn and Hastein's expedition earned them fame that endures today. But the cost had been high. Less than a third of the original force survived to return home. Future Viking leaders took this into account. They continued to raid Spain, but in the future avoided the Mediterranean. Local naval forces could too easily ambush a Viking fleet trying to negotiate the narrow Straits of Gibraltar. After this operation, Hastein and Bjorn went their separate ways. Bjorn returned to Denmark, hoping to use his wealth to gain the throne, but he lost his wealth in a shipwreck and died in Phrygia. Hastein's career as a freebooting plunderer went on for many years. To learn about his final adventure, battling against England's King Alfred the Great, click on the video link on your screen. You'll also find our video about Hastein's war with Alfred the Great linked in the description below.